Okay, so this is the last of those, the final three things that I read this year. I guess to the point. The 16th thing I read this year was this Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor. This is one out of all the ones I read this year. To be entirely honest, I don't know what to make of it. I felt like almost the description, the little like brief plot description that it gives you on the back cover, didn't entirely match up with the actual content of the book. Or maybe I just was expecting one thing and got another. I'm not entirely sure. But because of that, I don't have a ton to say about it because I'm still kind of confused about it. So trying to kind of unpack what exactly I read. I guess to give a very, very brief plot summary. Actually, let me just take theirs. First of all, the author, the big reason I even picked this up in the first place, Flannery O'Connor, I'd heard somebody recommend a book they'd read of hers before. I'd also heard some YouTube video, I think, specifically this book mentioned, so I figured I'd give her a shot. The description they give of her is, they say, Flannery O'Connor was born in Savannah, Georgia in 1925. A devout Catholic, she lived most of her life on a farm in Midgeville, Georgia, where she raised peacocks and wrote, which I just thought was funny because I guess that's one way to go about living. But she's part of this whole Southern Gothic tradition. Another reason I wanted to pick it up, because I felt like that was kind of an area that I hadn't read nearly enough of. Their little summary they give says this. They say, Wise Blood, Flannery O'Connor's astonishing and haunting first novel, is a classic of blah, blah, blah. It's a story of Hazel Motes, a 22-year-old caught in an unending struggle against his inborn desperate fate. He falls under the spell of a, quote, blind street preacher named Asa Hawks and his degenerate 15-year-old daughter. In an ironic, malicious gesture of his own non-faith and to prove himself a greater cynic than Hawks, he founds the Church Without Christ, but is still thwarted in his efforts to lose God. I say that because I didn't really get that vibe. It seemed to me like, okay, maybe that's what she was trying to say, but like the events of the plot, it seems to me like he does, in fact, lose God, which is why I can't really put two and two together there. There's a lot of symbolism behind blindness and what it means to be blind. The main character at the end, spoilers and all that, blinds himself after basically giving up on life. He like takes a bucket of lye and dunks his eyes in it and like purposely blinds himself. I don't know that this was what she was going for, but my takeaway from this, at least what it seemed to me like she was trying to communicate, was that humanity sucks and everybody is either some kind of liar or they've got some kind of grift that they're trying to push on you. And anybody that claims to like see beyond all that for themselves is actually blind themselves. That maybe just everybody's blind, or maybe I'm way off in my interpretation and that was Moby Dick bleeding into that. But all I can say definitively is that I didn't get the connection between what the back cover, what I expected from it based on that, and what I actually read in the actual contents of the book. But as far as Southern Gothic goes, another one I figured I'd give a shot to out of that same tradition was this, Nathan Coulter, by apparently a local Kentucky author, Wendell, who I'd heard about, I think, just earlier this year, and this is the first ever book that he wrote. I think he's still alive. I say that, and I'll jinx it, and like he'll die next week, hopefully not. I think he's like in his 90s or something. Has, to my understanding, lived in Kentucky his whole life, and I forget what county, somewhere like northwest of Frankfurt. But he's writing a lot about themes of kind of the connection between family and religion and environmentalism and kind of this connection to the earth, this kind of simple farm life. I won't go, I guess, too much about this, but he just released his most recent book and maybe his last book back in like October, and they had an event for it up at Joseph S. in Lexington, and I was one of like 40 people that stopped by for that on a random Tuesday night in October because I guess I had nothing better to do. This is, as far as the actual book itself, is another one that I think that you feel more than you think about. You get very, very simple, unpretentious sort of language that he uses. It kind of reminded me a bit of like of Hemingway, the little bit of him that I've read. You get a lot of stories, a lot of anecdotes throughout this that remind me of stories that I've heard from like my own family, particularly my grandparents, kind of that older generation. Things that they said they remember from growing up in small town Kentucky. You get this kind of folksy vibe to it related to that. And I've always thought, even before reading this, that I've always heard family members of mine up until my parents' generation, talk about growing up and stripping tobacco with their family, and talk about how like grueling of a process that is, and they have all these stories related to it, and almost like weirdly felt like I missed out on something with that. They almost talked about it like it was this rite of passage sort of thing, and this book, apparently this guy was thinking along parallel lines, because obviously he didn't miss out on this. He's like 10 years old, he grew up with this, and he talks about it as if it's this rite of passage, this coming of age sort of thing that connects all these members of this family. You get this this communal sort of grounding aspect to that simple common struggle that comes out of something like that, in like some weirdly metaphysical way. He's not like overtly trying to be philosophical with stuff, which is something I appreciate, because a lot of these other books obviously were, but it kind of leaks out from this pretty straightforward story that he's telling you. It wasn't my favorite book that I've ever read, but it was. I really enjoyed this. It was, if you're looking for like a simple sort of story to read, you don't have to think about it too much if you don't want to, but you can. I really enjoyed this. I've got that most recent book of his somewhere on the shelf. I'll probably get to that sometime next year. That brings me to the very last thing that I read this year. Finished up about a week ago now. Pride and Prejudice. I think, unless I'm completely wrong and I've got the wrong author, I should probably know this, but I don't know that Jane Austen, did she write Persuasion? If she did, I have read her before. If I'm mixing her up with somebody else, then I haven't before. Either way, I wanted to end the year on something, again, a little lighter, which explains Pride and Prejudice, and then the last book that I read. This was maybe one of the few happy endings, maybe the only happy ending out of any of the stories that I read this entire year. Also, as far as kind of getting away from the content of the book specifically, something that I noticed not only in this book, but with Mary Shelley and with other female authors that I've read, is I've noticed, and I say it because this is the focus, like this kind of is this book, there's this focus with them. They seem to be better at writing and picking up on interpersonal relationships, on kind of the interactions between different people, and the subtleties, I guess, for lack of a better word, between different people. That is the entire core of this book. She seems to be less concerned with broader ideas, like kind of abstract philosophical stuff, which isn't to say, obviously, that guys only write philosophical stuff and women only write interpersonal stuff, but I've noticed there seems to be like a certain trend in those directions. I think that's part of the reason I like Mary Shelley is she seems to blend those together, and Tolstoy as well. I'm looking at, it's the first year in a while I haven't read any Tolstoy, but he seems to also blend both of those two kind of patterns together pretty well. As far as this book, like the actual substance of it itself, it was really limited in the plot and its goals, what it was trying to do, but I thought it actually did that pretty well. It's got this interesting sort of narration style to it, where it's not quite first person, it's not quite third person. I think it might even just straight up be called second person, but it's technically told in a third person. It's kind of an all-knowing, omniscient sort of perspective, but at certain points throughout the book, it would almost like the third person objective narration would get colored by the thoughts of your protagonist, which I thought was kind of interesting. My biggest thing with this is it was pretty obvious reading through the plot of this that this was like the inspiration for the whole like genre fiction bullcrap that I can't stand today, particularly the whole like enemies to lovers crap. And I think it's really a shame that that's been diluted to that like simplest, most like base form of that, because the strength of this book, the reason it is as good as it is, while the plot itself is as like humble and quaint as it is that she's so good at picking up on the really complex interactions and relationships between all these different characters. Again, that is the core of the book. But I feel like that's kind of been diluted to a formula. And if you're reading through Pride and Prejudice, you don't come away with that. Like, it doesn't feel like a formula. These feel like actual human beings. I could go into like specific characters that I liked. I guess like particularly the dad in the book, and then obviously your main character, Elizabeth. But like you feel a certain way about certain characters regardless, in a way that feels almost formulaic in more recent modern stuff. Other than that, that's all I got for 2025. I recently started on another Stendhal book, The Red and the Black, but I'm only like 70 pages into that, and maybe I'll throw that in for next year's if I end up doing next year's, which I
Probably won't.
So probably a one-off. That's all I've got for this one.